The morphine was wearing off when she walked into my hospital room wearing my husband's cologne and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Diana Reeves stood in the doorway like she owned the place, clutching a bouquet of white lilies that looked suspiciously like funeral flowers. Her red hair was perfectly styled despite the early morning hour, and her designer handbag probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Clara, she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. I hope you don't mind me dropping by. Marcus told me about your accident. I stared at her through the haze of pain medication, trying to process why my husband's business associate was visiting me at 7 in the morning. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was flat on my back in a hospital bed while she looked like she'd stepped off a magazine cover. 3 days earlier, I'd been rushing to catch a client meeting when a distracted driver ran a red light and sent my car spinning into a concrete barrier. Now here I was with 2 broken ribs, a shattered collarbone, and apparently, an unexpected visitor who felt comfortable enough to let herself into my private room. How thoughtful, I managed, my voice hoarse from the breathing treatments. Though visiting hours don't start until 9. Diana's smile widened, revealing teeth so white they practically glowed under the harsh fluorescent lights. Oh, I have my ways of getting what I want. She settled into the chair beside my bed like we were old friends having coffee instead of virtual strangers in a medical facility. Besides, we need to talk privately, and this seemed like the perfect opportunity. Something cold settled in my stomach that had nothing to do with the IV fluids. The way she said privately with such emphasis, the calculated timing of her visit, the funeral flowers she was now arranging in the bedside vase with practiced efficiency. This wasn't a courtesy call from a concerned business acquaintance. The morning sun streamed through the hospital window, casting long shadows across the sterile white walls of my room at St. Catherine's Medical Center. I'd always prided myself on being able to read people, a skill that had served me well in my career as marketing director for Cascade Innovations, one of Portland's fastest-growing tech startups. But lying there in that hospital bed, connected to monitors and machines, I felt vulnerable in a way I hadn't experienced since childhood. My name is Clara Hoffman, and until 3 days ago, I thought I had a pretty good handle on my life. I was 34 years old with a successful career that I'd built from the ground up after graduating from Portland State with a degree in marketing and communications. My apartment in the Pearl District might have been small, but it was mine, filled with plants that somehow survived my chaotic schedule and books I actually read instead of just displaying for show. I'd worked my way up from an entry-level position at a struggling startup to marketing director at Cascade, where my campaigns had helped grow our client base by 300% in just 2 years. That's how I met Marcus Hoffman at a networking event downtown. Cascade was looking to expand our office space, and Marcus's development company, Hoffman Properties, specialized in converting old warehouses into modern office complexes. He was tall and broad-shouldered with dark hair that was just starting to show distinguished silver at the temples, and he had this way of listening when you spoke that made you feel like you were the most important person in the room. The venue was the historic Multnomah Athletic Club, all dark wood and old-world elegance, where Portland's business community gathered monthly to make connections and close deals. I was there representing Cascade, trying to network our way into a better office space that wouldn't break our startup budget. Most real estate developers I'd met were either pushy salesmen or distant aristocrats who saw small tech companies as too risky to bother with. Marcus was different. When I explained our space needs and budget constraints, he didn't brush me off or hand me a business card with instructions to call his assistant. Instead, he pulled out his phone and showed me photos of a warehouse in the industrial district that his company was converting. The timing might be perfect, he said, his brown eyes lighting up with genuine enthusiasm. We're looking for anchor tenants who understand what it means to build something from scratch. Our first tour of the space was on a rainy Tuesday morning. The warehouse still smelled of sawdust and fresh paint, with exposed brick walls and floor-to-ceiling windows that would flood the space with natural light once the construction was complete. Marcus walked me through every detail, explaining his vision for creating affordable workspace for growing companies. He wasn't just selling real estate, he was selling dreams. I started Hoffman Properties 5 years ago with nothing but a business plan and stubborn determination, he told me as we stood in what would become our main conference room. My father was a carpenter, and my mother cleaned office buildings downtown. They taught me that honest work and treating people fairly would take you farther than cutting corners or playing games. I was impressed not just by his business acumen, but by his values. In a city where gentrification was pushing out longtime residents, Mark seemed genuinely committed to responsible development. He offered payment plans for small businesses, hired local contractors, and reinvested profits into community projects. When he asked me to dinner that same week, ostensibly to discuss lease terms, I found myself saying yes for reasons that had nothing to do with office space. Our courtship unfolded over 3 months of dinner dates at local restaurants Marcus was helping to establish in his renovated buildings. He introduced me to hole-in-the-wall Vietnamese places in southeast Portland and farm-to-table bistros in the Alberta Arts District. He was passionate about the city's growth and development, but equally committed to preserving its character and supporting local businesses. Marcus proposed on the rooftop of the first building he'd ever developed, overlooking the Willamette River at sunset. The ring was a simple solitaire that caught the light beautifully, and his proposal was heartfelt rather than grandiose. "I want to build a life with you," he said, his voice steady despite the nerves I could see in his expression. "Not just a marriage, but a real partnership where we make each other stronger." I said yes because I believed him. I believed in the man who remembered that I took my coffee black with 1 sugar, who asked about my difficult clients and celebrated my marketing wins, who held my hand during scary movies, and listened patiently when I vented about workplace politics. The wedding was small and perfect, held at a restored barn in the Columbia River Gorge, with our closest friends and family in attendance. We bought a house in Beaverton, a charming craftsman with a wraparound porch and enough space for the home office I'd always wanted. Marcus converted the basement into his workspace, complete with drafting tables and architectural model displays. We fell into comfortable routines. Morning coffee on the porch before heading to our respective offices, evening walks through the neighborhood, weekend projects that slowly transformed our house into a home. For 2 years, life felt like everything I'd hoped it would be. My career continued to flourish as Cascade grew from a scrappy startup to a recognized player in Portland's tech scene. Marcus's business expanded as well, taking on larger projects and earning recognition from the City Planning Commission for his innovative approach to sustainable development. We talked about children someday, about expanding the house, about maybe taking that trip to Italy we'd been planning since our honeymoon. The cracks started small, almost imperceptible at first. Marcus began working later hours, citing complex city approval processes and demanding clients. Weekend site visits became more frequent, often requiring him to leave early Saturday morning and not return until Sunday evening. When I suggested joining him occasionally, he'd explain that construction sites were dangerous for non-professionals, or that he'd be too busy with inspections to spend time together. I threw myself into my own work, launching an ambitious campaign for Cascade's newest software platform. The hours were brutal, often keeping me at the office until 9 or 10 at night, but the results were worth it. Our client acquisition rate doubled, and we secured partnerships with 3 major Oregon-based corporations. The success should have been something to celebrate together, but Marcus seemed distracted whenever I tried to share the details of my victories. Around this time, Diana Reeves entered our orbit. She was an interior designer who specialized in commercial spaces, and Marcus hired her firm to handle the aesthetic elements of his larger projects. Diana had moved to Portland from San Francisco, bringing with her a portfolio of high-end restaurant and office designs that impressed even Marcus's most discerning clients. She was undeniably talented, with an eye for detail that transformed Marcus's functional spaces into environments that people actually wanted to spend time in. I met Diana at the opening celebration for one of Marcus's mixed-use developments in the Pearl District. She was impossible to miss, standing near the champagne table in a black cocktail dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Her red hair was pulled back in an elegant chignon, and she moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the most interesting person in any room. "You must be Clara," she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand when Marcus introduced us. "Marcus talks about you constantly. It's wonderful to finally meet the woman behind all those impressive marketing campaigns." Her compliment felt genuine at the time, and I found myself warming to her immediately. Diana asked thoughtful questions about my work, shared funny stories about difficult clients, and even offered to connect me with some contacts in the design world who might need marketing services. By the end of the evening, I was thinking that Portland's social scene might benefit from having someone like Diana around. Over the following months, Diana became a regular presence at Marcus's project events. She had a knack for remembering personal details and always seemed genuinely interested in how my latest campaigns were progressing. When I mentioned struggling to find the right aesthetic direction for Cascade's rebrand, she offered to brainstorm over coffee. When I was overwhelmed with a particularly demanding client, she recommended a spa where I could decompress. Marcus seemed pleased that Diana and I got along so well. "It's great that you two connect," he said one evening, as we were cleaning up after a dinner party where Diana had charmed all our guests with stories about her design adventures in San Francisco. "She really understands the creative process, like you do." Looking back now, I can see how carefully orchestrated those months were. Diana's friendliness, Marcus's encouragement of our budding relationship, the way she always seemed to show up at exactly the right moments to offer support or advice. But at the time, I was grateful to have found someone who understood the demands of building a creative career in a city that was still figuring out its identity. The accident happened on a Wednesday morning in October. I was running late for a crucial presentation to a potential client, a sustainable energy company that could become Cascade's biggest account to date. I'd stayed up until 2 in the morning, perfecting the pitch deck, knowing that landing this contract would secure my position as marketing director and potentially lead to a partnership track within the company.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
I was driving east on Burnside, mentally rehearsing my opening remarks, when I noticed the silver sedan in my peripheral vision running the red light at full speed. There wasn't time to brake or swerve. The impact sent my Toyota spinning across the intersection and into a concrete barrier. The last thing I remembered before losing consciousness was the sound of shattering glass and the acrid smell of deployed airbags. I woke up in the trauma unit at St. Catherine's Medical Center with Marcus holding my hand, his eyes red-rimmed with what looked like genuine fear and concern. The doctors explained that I'd suffered 2 broken ribs, a shattered collarbone, and a concussion that would require several days of observation. The collarbone would need surgery to repair properly, but the prognosis was good for a full recovery. "I was so scared," Marcus whispered, his voice breaking slightly. "When the hospital called, I thought." He didn't finish the sentence, just squeezed my hand tighter. The first 2 days passed in a blur of medical procedures, pain medication, and visits from concerned colleagues and friends. Beth Nakamura, my best friend since college and now a nurse at Oregon Health Sciences University, took time off to sit with me during the worst of the pain. My sister Lauren drove up from Eugene, bringing homemade soup and staying late into the evening to keep me company. Marcus was attentive but seemed distracted, frequently stepping out to take phone calls related to a major project that was approaching its deadline. "I'm sorry I can't be here more." He apologized after returning from another lengthy conversation in the hallway. "The city planning meeting is tomorrow, and if we don't get approval, we'll lose months of work." I understood. His business was demanding, just like mine, and I didn't want my accident to derail an important project. "Go handle whatever you need to handle," I told him. "I'll be fine here with the nurses and my terrible hospital television." That was Tuesday evening. Wednesday passed quietly with visits from Lauren and a few colleagues who brought flowers and updates from the office. Thursday morning, I woke early, feeling clearer than I had since the accident. The pain was still significant, but the fog of medication was lifting, and I was starting to think about when I might be able to return to work. That's when Diana Reeves walked into my room at 7 in the morning, carrying funeral flowers and wearing Marcus's cologne like a second skin. She settled into the visitor's chair with the ease of someone who belonged there, crossing her legs elegantly and placing her expensive handbag on the floor beside her. The early morning light streaming through the window caught the red highlights in her hair, and I noticed for the first time how perfectly applied her makeup was for such an early hour. "I know this might seem strange," Diana began, her voice taking on a tone I'd never heard from her before, less friendly, more businesslike. "But I wanted to talk to you while you're recovering, away from all the distractions of normal life." The cold feeling in my stomach intensified. Something was happening here that I didn't understand, but every instinct I'd developed over years of reading clients and competitors was telling me to pay attention. "Talk about what?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the growing unease. Diana leaned forward slightly, her green eyes fixed on mine, with an intensity that made me uncomfortably aware of how vulnerable I was in that hospital bed. "About Marcus, about our situation, and about an arrangement that I think could benefit all of us." The room suddenly felt smaller, the steady beeping of my heart monitor seeming to grow louder in the silence that followed her words. Outside my window, Portland was waking up to another gray October morning, but inside this sterile hospital room, something was shifting in ways I was only beginning to comprehend. Diana reached into her handbag and pulled out a manila envelope, placing it carefully on the bedside table next to the funeral flowers she'd brought. The envelope was thick, official-looking, the kind lawyers use for important documents. "Before you say anything," she continued, her voice soft but firm, "I want you to know that I didn't plan for things to happen this way. But sometimes life forces us into situations where we have to make practical decisions rather than emotional ones." I stared at the envelope, my mind racing to process what was happening. The morphine might have been wearing off, but the implications of Diana's presence, her words, the formal document she'd placed within my reach, were becoming terrifyingly clear. This wasn't a social visit from Marcus's business associate. This wasn't even a courtesy call from someone who'd heard about my accident. This was something else entirely, something that involved envelopes and arrangements and situations that needed to be discussed privately in hospital rooms at 7 in the morning. And whatever was in that envelope, whatever deal Diana Reeves had come to offer, I had the sinking feeling that my life as I knew it was about to change forever. The heart monitor's steady beeping seemed to quicken as I reached for the envelope with my uninjured hand, knowing that once I opened it, there would be no going back to the comfortable illusions I'd been living with for months. Diana watched me with the patient expression of someone who held all the cards, waiting for me to discover just how much my world had already changed while I was lying unconscious in a hospital bed, believing that my biggest problem was a few broken bones that would heal with time. My fingers trembled as I opened the envelope, the thick paper crackling in the quiet hospital room. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them. Marcus and Diana at restaurants I didn't recognize, holding hands across candlelit tables. Marcus and Diana entering a downtown hotel, his hand on the small of her back. Marcus and Diana at what appeared to be a weekend getaway, laughing on a deck overlooking the ocean. But it was the final photograph that made my breath catch in my throat. Diana in a flowing white sundress, her hand resting on a small but unmistakable bump, Marcus kneeling beside her with his palm pressed against her belly, both of them glowing with joy in golden afternoon light. "Congratulations," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "When are you due?" Diana's expression softened slightly, and for the first time since entering my room, she looked almost vulnerable. "March, we found out 2 months ago." The timeline hit me like another car crash. 2 months ago was when Marcus had started working those long weekend hours, when he'd become distant and distracted during our conversations, when he'd stopped talking about our future plans with the enthusiasm that used to light up his entire face. "How long?" I asked, setting the photographs aside with my good hand. 8 months, Diana admitted, her voice quiet but steady. "It started during the Pearl District project. We were working late hours, spending time together planning the interiors, and things just developed. 8 months. While I'd been celebrating my career successes and making plans for our future, my husband had been building an entirely different life with someone else. The betrayal cut deeper than my physical injuries, a pain that no amount of morphine could touch. The accident wasn't an accident, was it?" The words came out before I could stop them, a suspicion that had been growing in the back of my mind since Diana walked through my door. Diana's eyes widened in genuine shock. "Clara, no. Of course not." Marcus was devastated when he got the call from the hospital. We both were. I studied her face, looking for signs of deception, but her horror seemed authentic. Whatever else Diana might be, she apparently wasn't a would-be murderer. The relief I felt at this realization was quickly overshadowed by the larger reality of what the photographs represented. "So what's the deal you mentioned?" I asked, gesturing toward the envelope. "What arrangement could possibly benefit all of us?" Diana straightened in her chair, her businesswoman facade sliding back into place. "Marcus wants to file for divorce, but he's concerned about the financial implications. Your marketing work has significantly increased Cascade's value, and your salary and stock options represent a considerable asset. If you contest the divorce or demand a lengthy settlement process, it could impact both his business and mine." The clinical way she discussed the dismantling of my marriage was almost as shocking as the photographs. She was talking about my life, my career achievements, my financial security, like line items in a budget spreadsheet. "Additionally," Diana continued, "there's the matter of public perception. Marcus has worked hard to build a reputation as a family-oriented developer who cares about community values. A messy divorce, particularly one involving infidelity and pregnancy, could damage his standing with the City Planning Commission and his corporate clients. I felt a bitter laugh building in my chest. So you want me to make this easy for you? Quietly dissolve my marriage so you two can play house without any inconvenient complications. In exchange for a generous settlement, Diana said quickly, pulling another document from the envelope. Marcus is prepared to offer you the house, half of his business equity, and a lump sum payment that would allow you to start your own marketing firm, if you chose to leave Cascade. The offer was substantial, more than I would likely receive through traditional divorce proceedings. But the way Diana presented it, sitting in my hospital room, while I was literally flat on my back, felt like extortion disguised as generosity. And if I refuse? I asked. Diana's expression hardened slightly. Then Marcus will file for divorce anyway, and the proceedings will become public record. Your accident has already raised questions at Cascade about your ability to maintain your demanding schedule. A contentious divorce battle might raise additional concerns about your focus and reliability. There it was. The threat wrapped in concern, the velvet glove hiding the iron fist. Diana wasn't just offering me money to disappear quietly, she was warning me about what would happen if I chose to fight. I closed my eyes, trying to process everything I'd learned in the space of 20 minutes. My marriage was over, had been over for months without my knowledge. My husband was having a baby with another woman, and now that other woman was sitting beside my hospital bed, offering to buy my silence and compliance. I need to think about this, I said finally. Diana nodded, standing gracefully and smoothing her skirt. Of course, take all the time you need. Marcus knows I'm here, by the way. He thought it would be easier if the initial conversation came from me, woman to woman. The casual way she mentioned Marcus's involvement in this hospital room ambush made my stomach turn. They had planned this together, chosen the timing, decided that my vulnerability would make me more likely to accept their terms. There's one more thing, Diana said, pausing at the door. I know this is difficult, Clara, but I want you to know that Marcus does care about you. This situation isn't what any of us wanted, but sometimes life takes unexpected turns. After she left, I lay in the hospital bed staring at the ceiling, trying to reconcile the man I'd married with the one who would orchestrate this kind of calculated cruelty. The Marcus I knew would never have sent his pregnant mistress to negotiate the terms of our divorce while I was recovering from a traumatic accident. But then again, the Marcus I knew would never have had a pregnant mistress in the first place. The morning passed in a fog of medical procedures and concerned visits from nurses who noticed my elevated heart rate and stress levels. Dr. Patricia Valdez, the orthopedic surgeon who would be repairing my collarbone, stopped by to discuss the surgery scheduled for the following day. Your vitals are elevated, she observed, checking my chart. Are you experiencing increased pain? We can adjust your medication if needed. Just processing some unexpected news. I told her not ready to explain that my marriage had imploded while I was unconscious. Dr. Valdez nodded knowingly. Hospital stays can be overwhelming, especially when you're dealing with trauma recovery. If you need to speak with someone, we have counselors on staff who specialize in helping patients cope with major life changes. After she left, I found myself staring at the photographs Diana had left behind. In every image, Marcus looked genuinely happy in a way I hadn't seen from him in months. His smile was relaxed and natural, his body language open and affectionate. This wasn't a casual affair or a moment of weakness. This was a man in love with someone who wasn't his wife. The realization that I'd been living with a stranger for months was almost worse than the betrayal itself. How had I missed the signs? How had someone I'd shared a bed with, planned a future with, discussed children with, managed to hide such a significant part of his life? Beth arrived around noon, bringing coffee from my favorite shop downtown, and an expression that suggested she'd heard something troubling. I ran into Marcus in the parking lot, she said without preamble, settling into the chair Diana had vacated hours earlier. He seemed different, distracted, and he asked some strange questions about your recovery timeline. I studied my best friend's face, wondering how much I should reveal about my morning visitor, and the envelope full of photographs that were now tucked beneath my pillow. What kind of questions? When you'd be able to handle stress, whether the concussion might affect your decision-making abilities. Whether you'd discussed any major life changes recently. Beth's expression grew concerned. Clara, what's going on? And don't tell me nothing, because I've known you for 15 years and you get this particular look when something's seriously wrong. I made a decision that would prove crucial in the days ahead. Instead of protecting Marcus's secret or trying to handle the situation alone, I told Beth everything. About Diana's visit, the photographs, the pregnancy, the deal they wanted me to accept. I handed her the envelope and watched her face change as she absorbed the evidence of my husband's double life. That manipulative bastard, Beth said quietly, her nurse's training keeping her voice low despite her obvious fury. He sent his pregnant girlfriend to negotiate with you while you're in a hospital bed. What kind of sociopath does that? The kind who's been living a double life for 8 months, I replied, surprised by how calm I sounded. The kind who's been planning his exit strategy while I was celebrating our anniversary and making plans for our future. Beth studied the photographs more carefully, her expression growing thoughtful. Clara, look at these background details. This restaurant, this hotel, this vacation rental. These aren't cheap places. And look at Diana's jewelry, her clothes. This lifestyle they're living together costs serious money. She was right. The settings in the photographs suggested a level of luxury that went beyond Marcus's usual preferences. Even when we'd celebrated special occasions, he'd chosen nice but modest venues. The places shown in these images were the kind of establishments that charged a premium for exclusivity and privacy. Where do you think he's getting the money for all this? I asked. That's what we need to find out. Beth said grimly. Because if Marcus is financing his affair with money that should be part of your marital assets, then Diana's generous settlement offer might not be as generous as it appears. Over the next few hours, Beth transformed from supportive friend into investigative partner. She helped me think through the implications of everything Diana had revealed, and more importantly, what she might have concealed. Think about it, Beth said, pacing the small hospital room. Marcus's business has been expanding rapidly over the past year, but he's also been spending money on a secret relationship, expensive dates, and now probably preparing for a new baby. Either his business is more profitable than you realized, or he's been moving assets around to fund his double life. The possibility that Marcus had been hiding money while planning to divorce me added a new dimension to Diana's hospital room visit. If they were concerned about a lengthy settlement process, it might be because they had something significant to hide. I need to get access to our financial records, I said. Bank statements, business accounts, investment portfolios. If Marcus has been moving money around, there will be a trail. Can you do that from here? Beth asked. I nodded toward my laptop bag in the corner of the room. Everything's online now, and I still have access to all our joint accounts. I paused, struck by another realization. At least I did as of 3 days ago. If Marcus is as calculating as he seems, he might have already started changing passwords and access codes. Beth retrieved my laptop and helped me prop it up on the hospital bed's adjustable table. My left arm was still immobilized, but I could type slowly with my right hand. The first thing I checked was our joint checking account, the one we used for household expenses and mortgage payments. The balance was significantly lower than it should have been. Over the past 3 months, there had been regular transfers to an account I didn't recognize, each one for exactly $5,000. The amounts were large enough to be substantial but small enough to avoid triggering automatic notifications. $15,000. I murmured. Calculating the total. He's been siphoning off $5,000 a month. Look at this, Beth said, pointing to another series of transactions. These payments to DR Consulting. What's that? I'd never heard of DR Consulting, but the acronym made my stomach drop. Diana Reeves, I said. I bet he's been paying her company for design work that doesn't exist, essentially funneling marital assets to his girlfriend. We spent the rest of the afternoon documenting financial irregularities. The pattern that emerged was sophisticated and deliberate. Marcus hadn't just been having an affair. He'd been systematically preparing for divorce while building a financial cushion for his new life with Diana. The real estate projects I'd thought were expanding his business were actually being structured to minimize his visible assets. Property deals were being completed through partnerships and LLCs that kept his name off public records. Investment accounts I'd assumed were growing our retirement savings had been gradually liquidated, with the proceeds transferred to accounts I couldn't access. This is financial fraud. Beth said, bluntly. He's been stealing from your marriage to fund his affair and prepare for divorce. And now they want you to accept a settlement based on assets that are artificially low because he's hidden half of everything. The magnitude of the deception was staggering. This wasn't a case of a wandering husband who'd made a mistake. This was a calculated campaign of financial manipulation and emotional betrayal that had been planned and executed over months. By evening, I had a clearer picture of what Marcus and Diana were really offering. The generous settlement Diana had described would give me a fraction of what I was actually entitled to, based on the real value of assets Marcus had spent months hiding and diminishing. So what are you going to do? Beth asked as visiting hours were ending. I looked at the envelope full of photographs, then at the laptop screen showing months of financial deception, then out the window at the Portland skyline, where Marcus was probably having dinner with Diana, celebrating their successful manipulation of his hospitalized wife. I'm going to accept their deal, I said quietly. Beth's eyes widened in surprise. Clara, you can't. They're stealing from you. No, I said, a plan beginning to form in my mind. I'm going to accept their deal, but not for the reasons they think. Marcus wants me to be a cooperative victim who disappears quietly with a modest settlement. That's exactly what I'm going to give him. I don't understand. Marcus and Diana made one crucial mistake, I explained. They assumed that because I'm lying in a hospital bed, I'm helpless. They thought my accident made me vulnerable and desperate. But I'm not helpless, Beth. I'm a marketing director who's spent years studying consumer behavior and competitive strategy. And what they've just done is give me detailed intelligence about their plans, their weaknesses, and their fears. I gestured toward the laptop screen full of financial evidence. They don't know I've discovered their money trail. They don't know I understand the real value of what they're trying to steal, and they certainly don't know that I have no intention of disappearing quietly. Beth began to smile as she grasped what I was planning. You're going to let them think they've won. Exactly. Diana walked into my hospital room this morning, expecting to find a broken woman who would accept any offer that allowed her to avoid conflict. That's the person I'm going to be when I call Marcus tomorrow. Grateful, compliant, eager to move on with my life. Then I'm going to use every skill I've learned in marketing to give Marcus and Diana exactly what they deserve. But they won't see it coming until it's too late to stop it. The heart monitor beside my bed showed a steady, calm rhythm for the first time since Diana's visit. I wasn't a victim lying helplessly in a hospital bed anymore. I was a strategist with inside information and a very personal motivation to succeed. Marcus and Diana had made the mistake of underestimating me. They were about to learn that broken ribs and a shattered collarbone don't necessarily mean a broken spirit. And sometimes the most dangerous opponent is the one who lets you think you've already won. The call came at 8 in the morning, exactly 24 hours after Diana's visit. Marcus's voice carried a tension I hadn't heard before, carefully controlled but unmistakably strained. How are you feeling today? He asked, his tone overly solicitous in a way that immediately put me on alert. Better, I replied, injecting just the right amount of weary resignation into my voice. The surgery is scheduled for this afternoon, and Dr. Valdez says the recovery should be straightforward. That's good to hear. There was a pause, and I could practically feel him gathering courage for what came next. Clara, I know Diana stopped by yesterday. She mentioned you two had a conversation. We did. I let silence stretch between us, knowing that Marcus's discomfort with confrontation would compel him to fill the void. I want you to know that wasn't how I intended to handle this situation. Diana thought it might be easier, less emotional if she explained things first. Less emotional. As if there was a comfortable, painless way to discover your husband's pregnant mistress. I gripped the phone tighter, channeling my rage into the performance I was about to deliver. Marcus, I'm not going to pretend this doesn't hurt, I said, letting my voice crack slightly. But lying here in this hospital bed, thinking about everything, I realize I haven't been the wife you needed. My career, the long hours, always being focused on the next campaign or client. Maybe this is for the best. The relief in his voice was palpable. Clara, you're an amazing woman. This isn't about you not being enough. Sometimes people just grow in different directions. I know. I took a shaky breath, as if fighting back tears. Diana showed me the settlement proposal. It's very generous, Marcus. More than I expected. I want to make sure you're taken care of, he said quickly. The house, The business equity, the lump sum payment. You could start your own company, be your own boss. Isn't that something you've always talked about? It was something I'd mentioned usually during late-night conversations about our dreams and future plans. The fact that he was now using those intimate moments to manipulate me into accepting his betrayal made my stomach turn, but I forced myself to sound grateful rather than disgusted. It is, I agreed. And you're right, it would give me the independence I've always wanted. I just need some time to process everything. This accident has made me realize how fragile life is, how quickly things can change. Of course, take all the time you need. There's no rush. But there was a rush, and we both knew it. Diana's pregnancy wouldn't wait for my emotional processing, and Marcus's financial house of cards required a quick, quiet resolution before anyone started asking difficult questions. After ending the call, I lay back against the hospital pillows, marveling at how easily Marcus had bought my performance. He wanted to believe I was broken and compliant. So that's exactly what he saw. It was a classic case of confirmation bias, something I'd exploited countless times in marketing campaigns. People see what they expect to see, especially when it aligns with what they want to be true. My laptop was already open beside me, and I spent the next hour diving deeper into the financial records I'd started investigating the day before. What Beth and I had discovered was just the tip of the iceberg. The more I understood Marcus's methods, the more impressed I became with the sophistication of his deception. He'd been planning this divorce for at least a year, possibly longer. The timeline aligned perfectly with Diana's entry into our lives. While I'd been thinking she was becoming a friend, she'd actually been conducting reconnaissance, learning about my habits, my schedule, my emotional vulnerabilities. Every coffee date, every casual conversation, every moment of seeming female bonding had been intelligence gathering for the campaign they were waging against me. The DR consulting payments were more extensive than I'd initially realized. Over the past 8 months, Marcus had transferred nearly $40,000 to Diana's fictitious company, disguised as design fees for projects that existed only on paper. The money had come from our joint business account, the one I'd helped fund with my Cascade stock options and performance bonuses. But Marcus's financial manipulation went beyond simple theft. He'd been systematically restructuring his business deals to minimize visible assets while maximizing hidden ones. Property developments that should have generated substantial profits were being routed through a maze of partnerships and shell companies. On paper, Marcus appeared to be a moderately successful developer with limited liquid assets. In reality, he was building a substantial nest egg for his new life with Diana. The most damning evidence was hidden in the metadata of financial documents stored on our shared cloud drive. Marcus had been sloppy about digital security, assuming I'd never think to look. Buried in the revision histories of spreadsheets and contracts, I found email addresses for offshore accounts, contact information for lawyers who specialized in asset protection, and most importantly, a detailed timeline for executing his exit strategy. According to his notes, Marcus had originally planned to file for divorce in December, after Diana's pregnancy became more advanced and harder to hide. My accident had accelerated their timeline, providing what they saw as a perfect opportunity to secure my cooperation while I was vulnerable and dependent. The arrogance of their plan was breathtaking. They'd calculated exactly how much money they needed to offer me to ensure my silence and compliance. The settlement Diana had proposed was generous enough to seem magnanimous while actually representing a fraction of what I was legally entitled to claim. My phone buzzed with a text from Lauren, my sister, asking if she should drive up from Eugene again. I realized I needed to start assembling my own support network, people who could help me execute the plan that was beginning to crystallize in my mind. Instead of responding to Lauren immediately, I called Tom Rodriguez, a nurse I'd befriended during my stay. Tom had mentioned working part-time as a private investigator, handling insurance fraud cases and background checks for local attorneys. "I need a professional favor," I told him when he answered, "and I'm willing to pay your regular rates." "What kind of favor?" "I need comprehensive background checks on 2 people. Financial records, property ownership, business relationships, the works, and I need it done quietly." Tom was quiet for a moment. "This is about your husband, isn't it?" I couldn't help but notice the redhead who visited yesterday didn't exactly seem like a casual acquaintance. "It's about justice," I said simply. "And I need to know exactly who I'm dealing with before I make any decisions about my future. Give me the names and any information you have. I'll see what I can dig up." I provided Tom with everything I knew about Diana Reeves and Marcus's business operations. Within hours, he'd uncovered information that painted an even darker picture of their relationship and their plans. Diana Reeves had a history. Her move from San Francisco hadn't been voluntary career advancement. She'd been forced to leave after a scandal involving falsified design credentials and misappropriated client funds. The prestigious portfolio she'd brought to Portland was partially fabricated, featuring work done by other designers that she'd claimed as her own. More disturbing was the pattern of her relationships. Diana had a history of targeting successful men in committed relationships, using professional connections to establish personal relationships, then leveraging those relationships for financial gain. Marcus wasn't her first married businessman, and based on her pattern, he probably wouldn't be her last. The information about Marcus was equally revealing. His business expansion over the past year had been funded partly through loans secured against properties I didn't know he owned. He'd been using my credit score and income statements to qualify for financing, then channeling the proceeds into accounts I couldn't access. The legal term for this kind of behavior was financial fraud, and the penalties were severe. But the most valuable intelligence Tom provided was about Diana's current situation. Despite her expensive lifestyle and designer wardrobe, she was actually in significant financial trouble. The scandal in San Francisco had resulted in lawsuits that were still pending, and she owed substantial money to former clients and business partners. Her relationship with Marcus wasn't just romantic, it was a financial lifeline that she desperately needed. Armed with this information, I began crafting my response strategy. Diana and Marcus had made their offer expecting me to react emotionally, either accepting it gratefully or rejecting it angrily. Instead, I was going to do something they wouldn't expect. I was going to negotiate. The key to successful negotiation is understanding what the other party really wants and what they're afraid of losing. Marcus wanted a quick, quiet divorce that wouldn't damage his business reputation or expose his financial manipulations. Diana wanted security and legitimacy, the respectability that came with being Marcus's wife rather than his mistress. What they were both afraid of was exposure. Marcus couldn't afford for his clients and business partners to discover his financial irregularities. Diana couldn't risk her scandalous past becoming public knowledge in Portland's close-knit professional community. Their entire plan depended on my cooperation and silence. That evening, I called Marcus back, timing the conversation for when I knew Diana would likely be with him. I wanted her to hear both sides of what I was about to propose. "I've been thinking about our conversation," I began, my voice still carrying that note of weary acceptance. "And about the settlement offer. It's generous, but I have some concerns about the timeline." "What kind of concerns?" Marcus asked, his voice immediately tense. "Well, I'll need time to recover from my surgery before I can handle the stress of moving out of the house and setting up a new living situation. And there are practical matters to consider. Insurance, healthcare coverage during the transition, that sort of thing." "Of course," Marcus said quickly. "We can work out those details. There's also the matter of my career. If I'm going to start my own marketing firm, I'll need time to transition my clients and develop a business plan. I wouldn't want to rush into something that important." I could hear muffled conversation in the background, Diana's voice though I couldn't make out the words. "How much time are you thinking?" Marcus asked. 6 months, I said. "Maybe 8. Just enough time to recover fully and make thoughtful decisions about my future. During that time we could live separately but keep the divorce proceedings private until I'm ready to move forward." The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had been dropped. "Clara," Marcus said finally, "I don't think that timeline works for our situation." "Because of the baby," I said, matter-of-factly. "Diana's pregnancy." Another pause, this one shorter but more tense. "You deserve to be happy, Marcus," I continued. "And Diana deserves to have her child born into a stable, legitimate family. I understand that. But I also deserve to recover from my accident and plan my future without being rushed into decisions because of your timeline. What are you suggesting?" "A compromise. I'll agree to an expedited divorce, but I need additional compensation for the inconvenience and stress of handling this while I'm recovering from surgery. Consider it a premium for fast service." I could hear Diana's voice more clearly now, though still not her words. Her tone was sharp, urgent. "What kind of additional compensation?" Marcus asked. "Double the settlement amount," I said calmly. "And I keep my Cascade stock options, which aren't marital property anyway since they were earned through my individual performance." "Clara, that's not reasonable." "Actually, it's very reasonable. I've done some research on divorce settlements in Oregon. Given the length of our marriage and my contributions to our household income, I could probably get more than that if I contested the divorce and demanded a full asset evaluation. The threat was implicit but clear. I was offering them a deal that was still advantageous compared to what I could demand through litigation, but it would cost them significantly more than their original lowball offer. I need to think about this, Marcus said. Of course. Take your time. I'm not going anywhere. I paused for effect. Although I should mention that Dr. Valdez wants me to avoid stress during my recovery. She's recommended that I might benefit from talking to someone about the emotional trauma of discovering my husband's affair while I was hospitalized. Professional counseling can be very helpful for processing these kinds of experiences. The implication was clear. If they pushed me too hard or tried to rush me beyond my comfort level, I might start talking to people about what had happened. Professional counselors were bound by confidentiality, but friends, family members, and business associates were not. Let's talk tomorrow, Marcus said quickly. After you've had your surgery and you're feeling better. After ending the call, I lay back in the hospital bed feeling genuinely calm for the first time since the accident. I wasn't actually interested in doubling the settlement amount, though I'd certainly take it if Marcus agreed. What I was really doing was buying time and establishing my position as someone who couldn't be bullied or rushed. Every day I delayed their plans was another day for me to gather information, build my case, and prepare for the real confrontation that was coming. Because despite what I'd told Marcus, I had no intention of accepting any settlement that allowed him and Diana to profit from their betrayal and theft. The surgery the next morning went smoothly, though the recovery was more painful than I'd expected. Dr. Valdez had to use pins and screws to rebuild my shattered collarbone, and the post-operative pain was intense despite the medication. But even through the haze of anesthesia and painkillers, I remained focused on the larger battle I was preparing to fight. Beth visited that afternoon, bringing updates on the investigation Tom had been conducting. "You're not going to believe what he found," she said, settling into the chair beside my bed. "Marcus isn't just hiding assets from you. He's been falsifying loan applications, inflating property values, and misrepresenting his financial position to multiple lenders." "What does that mean?" "It means he's committed bank fraud on a massive scale. If the right people found out about this, Marcus wouldn't just lose his business. He'd face federal criminal charges." The scope of Marcus's illegal activities was staggering. Over the past 2 years he'd been running an increasingly sophisticated scheme to inflate his apparent wealth while hiding his real assets. The loans he'd secured were based on fraudulent financial statements, and the properties he'd used as collateral were either overvalued or didn't legally belong to him. "There's more," Beth continued. "Tom found evidence that Diana has been involved in the fraud from the beginning. She's been helping Marcus create fake invoices and documentation to justify the money transfers to her accounts. Diana wasn't just Marcus's mistress, she was his co-conspirator in a criminal enterprise that had defrauded multiple financial institutions. The baby she was carrying was the product of a relationship built on lies, theft, and fraud." "What about her background?" I asked. "Even worse than we thought. The San Francisco scandal involved more than just falsified credentials. Diana was part of a design firm that was stealing from clients, overcharging for materials and pocketing the difference. She fled California just ahead of criminal charges. The woman who had sat in my hospital room offering me a deal was actually a fugitive from justice who had manipulated my husband into becoming her accomplice in a multi-state fraud scheme." "So what's our next move?" Beth asked. "We're going to give them exactly what they're asking for," I said. "I'm going to accept Marcus's divorce terms, cooperate fully with their timeline, and disappear quietly from their lives. Clara, you can't seriously be considering that after everything we've discovered." "I'm not considering it," I replied, smiling despite the post-surgical pain. "I'm going to do it. But first I'm going to make sure that when I disappear, I take their entire criminal enterprise down with me." The plan I outlined to Beth was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of confronting Marcus and Diana directly or threatening them with exposure, I was going to become the perfect cooperative victim while simultaneously documenting every aspect of their criminal activities. "They want me to be grateful and compliant," I explained. "So I'll be grateful and compliant right up until the moment I hand all the evidence to the FBI, the IRS, and every financial institution they've defrauded." "How do you know they won't just disappear once the divorce is final?" "Because they can't," I said. Marcus's business is too established here, and Diana's reputation in Portland is the only thing protecting her from the consequences of her California crimes. They think they've found the perfect setup, a legitimate business front and a respectable family life that will shield them from scrutiny. And you're going to let them think they've succeeded. Right up until the moment their entire world collapses around them. I looked out the hospital window at the Portland skyline, where Marcus was probably celebrating his successful manipulation of his injured wife. They made one crucial mistake, Beth. They assumed that because I was hurt and vulnerable, I was also helpless and stupid. They're about to learn the difference between those things. The heart monitor beside my bed showed a steady, strong rhythm. Despite the physical pain of my injuries and surgery, I felt stronger and more focused than I had in months. Marcus and Diana had inadvertently done me a favor by revealing their true natures so completely. Now I knew exactly who I was dealing with, and I had the intelligence and evidence needed to destroy them both. The only question was timing. I needed to recover enough to execute my plan effectively, but not so much time that Marcus and Diana became suspicious of my cooperation. The game they'd started in my hospital room was far from over, and they had no idea how dramatically the rules were about to change. 2 weeks after my surgery, I was discharged from St. Catherine's Medical Center with a carefully crafted plan and a timeline that would have impressed any project manager. Marcus picked me up personally, his face a mask of concerned attentiveness that might have fooled me once but now struck me as theatrical overacting. "How are you feeling?" he asked, as we drove through downtown Portland toward our Beaverton home. Dr. Valdez said the surgery was more complex than expected. "Tired but grateful," I replied, settling gingerly into the passenger seat. She warned me that recovery would take several months, but the important thing is that I'll heal completely. Marcus nodded, his grip tightening slightly on the steering wheel. Several months wasn't what he and Diana had planned for, and I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes as he processed this information. "I've set up the guest bedroom for you," he said. "I thought it would be more comfortable than trying to navigate the stairs to our bedroom while you're recovering." Our bedroom. The casual possessive pronoun revealed everything about how Marcus viewed our separation. In his mind, he'd already moved on, already established ownership over spaces that had been ours. The guest bedroom wasn't a thoughtful accommodation, it was exile disguised as consideration. The house felt different the moment I walked through the front door. Subtle changes that most people wouldn't notice, but I'd lived there for 3 years and knew every detail. Diana's influence was everywhere. Fresh flowers in arrangements I hadn't chosen, throw pillows and colors that matched her aesthetic preferences. Even the coffee table books had been rearranged to feature interior design magazines that hadn't been there before my accident. "I had someone come in to clean and get things ready for your homecoming," Marcus explained, catching my survey of the changes. "I wanted everything to be perfect for your recovery." Someone. Not a cleaning service, not a housekeeper, but someone. Diana had been living in our house while I was in the hospital, making herself comfortable, marking her territory like an animal establishing dominance. The realization should have infuriated me, but instead I felt a cold satisfaction. Every change she'd made was evidence of her involvement in Marcus's deception, proof of a relationship that went far beyond what they'd admitted to. "It's beautiful," I said with genuine admiration. "Whoever did this has excellent taste." Marcus's relief was palpable. He'd expected anger, confrontation, tears about Diana's obvious presence in our home. Instead, I was complimenting his mistress's interior design skills while examining every detail for future use as evidence. Over the following days, I established a routine that appeared focused on recovery while actually serving as intelligence gathering. I spent hours in the home office Marcus had set up for me, ostensibly working on a gradual transition back to my marketing responsibilities at Cascade. In reality, I was documenting every aspect of Marcus and Diana's criminal enterprise. The home office gave me access to Marcus's business files, many of which he'd stored in our shared network drive without bothering to restrict my access. His confidence in my compliance was his greatest weakness. He genuinely believed that my cooperation during the divorce proceedings meant I'd lost interest in his activities. What I discovered in those files exceeded even Tom's investigation. Marcus hadn't just been defrauding banks and hiding assets, he'd been running a sophisticated money laundering operation disguised as legitimate real estate development. Property purchases were being financed with cash from unknown sources, then immediately refinanced through traditional lenders to create the appearance of legitimate equity. The cash sources were particularly interesting. Large sums were flowing through Diana's design company from clients who existed only on paper. The money would arrive as payment for fictitious design projects, sit in DR consulting accounts just long enough to appear legitimate, then get transferred to Marcus's development projects as investment capital. But the most damaging evidence was hidden in Marcus's personal email account, which he'd been careless enough to leave logged in on the home computer. Months of correspondence with Diana revealed not just their romantic relationship but detailed discussions of their criminal activities and plans for my elimination from their lives. The emails made it clear that Diana had targeted Marcus deliberately, researching his business and personal situation before engineering their first meeting. She'd identified him as an ideal mark, successful enough to have assets worth stealing but insecure enough to be manipulated by an attractive woman who seemed interested in both him and his work. Their correspondence also revealed something I hadn't expected: they were planning to disappear after the divorce was finalized. Marcus had been converting assets to cryptocurrency and offshore accounts, preparing for a quick exit from Portland once he'd secured my cooperation and eliminated the legal complications of our marriage. Diana's pregnancy had accelerated their timeline, but it had also created complications. The baby would tie them to the United States in ways that would make international flight more difficult. They needed legitimate identities and clean money to establish themselves wherever they planned to relocate. Reading these emails, I realized that my original plan had been inadequate. Simply exposing their crimes after the divorce wouldn't be enough if they were planning to flee the country. I needed to trap them in a situation where escape was impossible, where their own greed and arrogance would become the instruments of their destruction. The opportunity came from an unexpected source. Richard Stanton, Marcus's business partner, called the house asking to speak with me directly. I'd met Richard several times at business functions, but we'd never had personal conversations. His request for a private meeting seemed odd until he explained his concern. "Clara, I need to ask you something confidential," Richard said when he arrived at the house later that week. Marcus was at a construction site, and Diana was presumably at her own apartment, giving us privacy for what turned out to be a crucial conversation. "Of course, Richard, what's on your mind?" "It's about Marcus's recent business decisions. Some of the partnerships he's been entering, the financing arrangements, the speed at which he's been expanding. I'm concerned that he might be taking on too much risk." Richard's concern was carefully phrased, but I could hear the underlying worry. As Marcus's business partner, he was potentially liable for any illegal activities conducted under their shared company structure. If Marcus was engaged in fraud, Richard's own business and reputation were at risk. "What kind of concerns?" I asked, projecting innocent curiosity rather than the intense interest I actually felt. "Large cash transactions without clear documentation. Partnerships with companies I can't verify. Projects that seem designed more for moving money than generating sustainable profits." Richard paused, studying my expression. "I've been in this business for 20 years. Clara, I know what legitimate development looks like, and some of what Marcus has been doing lately doesn't fit that pattern. Have you discussed this with Marcus?" "I've tried, but he's been evasive. Claims everything is handled by his private accountant and that I shouldn't worry about the details." Richard's frustration was evident. "The problem is, if something goes wrong, it affects both of us. Our partnership agreement makes us jointly liable for business debts and legal issues." I realized that Richard could be either a valuable ally or a dangerous complication, depending on how I handled the situation. If he discovered Marcus's criminal activities independently, he might take action that would interfere with my own plans. But if I could guide his investigation carefully, he could provide legitimate business justification for exposing Marcus's crimes. "What do you think you should do?" I asked. "I'm considering demanding a full audit of our partnership finances. But that would essentially accuse Marcus of financial impropriety, which could destroy our working relationship and our friendship. Would it help if you had some preliminary information before making that decision? Something that could guide your approach?" Richard's eyes sharpened. "What kind of information?" "I've been working from home since my accident, helping Marcus organize some of his business files. I might have noticed some of the same patterns you're concerned about. If you'd like, I could pull together a summary of what I've seen, just to help you determine whether a full audit is necessary." "That would be incredibly helpful, Clara. But are you sure Marcus would be comfortable with you sharing that information?" "Richard Marcus is my husband. If there are problems with his business that could affect our financial future, I have every right to understand them. And you're his partner. If there are issues that could affect your liability, you have every right to know about them too." What I was offering Richard was a way to discover Marcus's crimes without appearing to investigate his partner behind his back. I would provide the evidence, but it would come from me as Marcus's concerned wife, rather than from Richard as a suspicious business partner. Over the next week, I prepared a comprehensive dossier of Marcus's financial irregularities, carefully presenting them as concerns about business practices rather than evidence of criminal activity. The documentation was thorough but subtle, allowing Richard to draw his own conclusions about the implications. When Richard reviewed the materials, his reaction was everything I'd hoped for. His face went pale as he absorbed the extent of Marcus's deception, not just toward me, but toward their business partnership and the financial institutions they worked with. "Clara, this is much worse than I thought," he said grimly. "If even half of this is accurate, Marcus has been using our partnership as a front for money laundering and bank fraud. I could lose my business license, face criminal charges, lose everything I've worked for. What are you going to do?" "I need to protect myself legally. That means severing the partnership and reporting suspicious activities to the appropriate authorities." Richard looked genuinely pained by the decision. "I considered Marcus a friend, but I can't risk my family's future to protect him from the consequences of his choices." "I understand. And Richard, I want you to know that whatever Marcus has done, it doesn't reflect on your character or your business practices. Anyone who knows you would recognize that." "Thank you, Clara. And I want you to know that if you need any assistance during your divorce proceedings, if you need someone to verify Marcus's business practices or testify about his financial situation, I'll do whatever I can to help." Richard's offer was exactly what I needed. As Marcus's business partner, he would have credibility with law enforcement and financial regulators that I couldn't provide as an estranged wife. His testimony would transform my evidence from allegations made during a contentious divorce into legitimate business concerns raised by a respected member of Portland's development community. After Richard left, I called Tom Rodriguez to update him on this new development and to accelerate the timeline for exposing Marcus and Diana's crimes. "Richard's involvement changes everything." Tom agreed. "Once he files a complaint with the State Business Licensing Board and reports the suspicious financial activities to federal authorities, Marcus and Diana won't be able to simply disappear. They'll be under active investigation by multiple agencies." "How long do we have before Marcus realizes what's happening?" "Days, maybe a week. Once Richard starts the legal process, Marcus will be notified of the investigations. He'll know someone has been documenting his activities. Then we need to move fast. Can you help me contact the FBI and provide them with everything we've gathered?" "Already working on it. I have contacts in the white-collar crime division who specialize in financial fraud cases. With the evidence you've compiled and Richard's business partner testimony, they'll have everything they need to build a solid case." That evening, Marcus came home from work in an unusually good mood, humming to himself as he prepared dinner. He seemed lighter, more relaxed than he'd been in weeks. "Good day at the office?" I asked. "Great day, we just closed on the financing for the Hawthorne project. The largest single development deal I've ever negotiated." He paused in his cooking to smile at me. "Things are really coming together, Clara. For both of us." I realized that Marcus was celebrating what he thought was the final piece of his exit strategy. The Hawthorne project financing was probably the last major cash infusion he needed before disappearing with Diana. In his mind, everything was proceeding perfectly according to plan. "That's wonderful news, Marcus. I'm proud of what you've accomplished. And how are things going with your transition back to work? Any thoughts about that business plan we discussed?" "Actually, I've been thinking about taking some time off once the divorce is finalized. Maybe traveling, exploring new possibilities. I feel like I need some space to figure out who I am outside of our marriage." Marcus's relief was so obvious it was almost comical. The idea that I might disappear voluntarily, removing myself from Portland and any potential complications his new life might face, was clearly appealing to him. "I think that's a healthy approach," he said. "Sometimes we need distance to gain perspective." "I agree. In fact, I've decided to accept the settlement terms Diana outlined. I don't want to drag this process out any longer than necessary." "Really, Clara, are you sure?" "I don't want you to feel pressured." "I'm sure. I've had time to think about it, and I realize that fighting over money or property won't change what's happened between us. I'd rather focus on building a new future than relitigating the past." "That's very mature of you. I'll have my attorney draw up the papers immediately." "Perfect. How long do you think the process will take?" A few weeks at most. Oregon has simplified divorce procedures for couples who agree on terms. A few weeks, that gave me a very specific timeline for the trap I was setting. Marcus and Diana needed to believe they were successfully executing their plan right up until the moment law enforcement closed in on them. The timing had to be perfect too early, and they might escape too late, and they might disappear before facing justice. Over the next few days, I played my role flawlessly. I was cooperative with the divorce proceedings, grateful for Marcus's generous settlement terms, and excited about my future independence. I even suggested having dinner with Diana to discuss the transition and ensure there were no hard feelings between us. "That's very gracious of you," Marcus said when I proposed the idea. "I know this situation has been difficult, but it means a lot that you're willing to handle it with such dignity." Dignity. The word almost made me laugh. Marcus had no idea that his definition of dignity and mine were completely different. In his mind, dignity meant accepting betrayal quietly. In mine, it meant ensuring that justice was served regardless of personal cost. The dinner with Diana was scheduled for the following Friday at a trendy restaurant in the Pearl District. I chose the location carefully, public enough to prevent any dramatic confrontations, but intimate enough for the private conversation that would serve as the final act of my performance. Diana arrived looking radiant, her pregnancy now visible but elegant in a way that suggested expensive maternity wear. She embraced me with what seemed like genuine warmth, though I could see the calculation behind her eyes as she assessed my demeanor. "Clara, you look wonderful. Much better than when I visited you in the hospital." "I feel much better. Recovery has been slow, but I'm starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel." We ordered wine for her and sparkling water for Diana, settling into the kind of conversation that might occur between old friends navigating a complicated situation. "I want to thank you for being so understanding about everything," Diana said after we'd covered the safe topics of my health and her pregnancy. "I know this can't be easy for you. Honestly, it's been a relief in some ways. Marcus and I had been growing apart for months before your relationship began. I was so focused on my career that I wasn't paying attention to what he needed." "You're very kind to say that. Not many women would be so gracious in this situation. I've learned that holding on to anger only hurts yourself. Besides, I can see how happy Marcus is with you. That's worth something. Even if it means the end of our marriage." Diana's eyes misted slightly, and for a moment I wondered if her emotion was genuine or another layer of performance. "I want you to know that I never intended for things to develop the way they did. Marcus and I tried to fight our feelings, but sometimes connection happens despite our best intentions. I understand, and I want you to know that I don't blame you for what happened. If anything, I'm grateful. You've given both Marcus and me the chance to find relationships that truly fulfill us. What will you do now? Marcus mentioned you might travel. I'm thinking about it, maybe Europe, maybe Asia. I've always wanted to see the world without the constraints of work schedules and responsibilities." "That sounds wonderful. A chance to reinvent yourself completely." "Exactly. A fresh start, a new identity, the opportunity to become whoever I want to be." Diana raised her glass in a toast, to fresh starts and new beginnings. "To fresh starts," I agreed, clinking my sparkling water against her wine glass. What Diana didn't realize was that my fresh start would begin the moment she and Marcus were arrested for their crimes. The new identity I was planning to create was that of a woman who had survived betrayal and fraud, who had fought back against those who tried to victimize her, and who had emerged stronger and wiser from the experience. As we finished dinner and prepared to part ways, Diana reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I hope we can stay in touch, Clara. I know that might seem strange, but I'd like to think we could be friends." "I'd like that too," I replied, meaning it in a way she couldn't possibly understand. I would indeed be staying in touch with Diana, though not in the way she imagined. I would be following her criminal trial, her sentencing, and her eventual imprisonment with great interest. After dinner, I returned home to find Marcus waiting with champagne and a relieved expression that told me everything I needed to know about his state of mind. "How did it go?" he asked. "Better than I expected. Diana is lovely, Marcus. I can see why you fell in love with her." "Thank you for saying that. It means more than you know." I also told her about my travel plans. She seemed to think it was a wonderful idea. "It is a wonderful idea. You deserve to explore the world and discover new possibilities." We drank champagne and talked about my future adventures, both of us performing our roles in this elaborate charade. Marcus thought he was celebrating the successful manipulation of his naive wife. I was celebrating the imminent destruction of two people who had underestimated me so completely that they'd handed me the tools of their own downfall. The next morning, Richard Stanton called to inform me that he'd filed formal complaints with both state and federal authorities regarding Marcus's business practices. The investigations would begin immediately, and arrest warrants would likely be issued within the week. "Are you ready for what's coming?" Richard asked. "I've been ready since the day Diana walked into my hospital room thinking I was helpless," I replied. "It's time for Marcus and Diana to learn that being injured doesn't mean being defeated." The trap was set, the timeline established, and the evidence compiled. All that remained was watching Marcus and Diana's carefully constructed world collapse around them, knowing that their own greed and arrogance had made their destruction inevitable. The call came at 6 in the morning on a Tuesday, exactly 3 weeks after my dinner with Diana. I was awake already, sitting by the window with my coffee, watching the sun rise and waiting for the phone to ring. I knew it would be Marcus, and I knew he would be panicking. "Clara, we need to talk immediately." His voice was strained, missing the careful composure he'd maintained throughout our divorce proceedings. "Can you meet me at the office in an hour?" "Of course, Marcus. Is everything all right? Just come to the office. And Clara, don't talk to anyone about anything until we've had a chance to speak." The desperation in his voice told me everything I needed to know. The federal investigation had begun, Richard had testified about the fraudulent business practices, and Marcus was finally realizing that his carefully constructed world was collapsing around him. I arrived at Hoffman Properties to find Marcus pacing behind his desk like a caged animal, his usually perfect appearance disheveled and his eyes red-rimmed with sleeplessness. Diana sat in one of the client chairs, her face pale despite her makeup, one hand protectively covering her pregnant belly. "What's this about?" I asked, settling into the other chair with the careful movements of someone still recovering from surgery. Marcus stopped pacing and faced me directly. "Richard has filed complaints with the FBI and the State Attorney General's office. He's claiming that I've been engaged in financial fraud and money laundering through our partnership." "That's terrible, Marcus. Why would Richard do something like that?" "He says he has documentation of irregular financial transactions, unexplained cash flows, and falsified business records." Marcus's voice cracked slightly. "Clara, I need to know if you've been sharing information about my business with Richard or anyone else." The question hung in the air between us, and I could see Diana watching my reaction carefully. This was the moment they'd been dreading, the possibility that their cooperative victim had actually been an active threat all along. "Marcus, I'm hurt that you would even ask that question." I let my voice tremble slightly, as if his accusation had wounded me deeply. "All I've done is try to support you through our divorce proceedings. If Richard has concerns about your business practices, that's between you and him. But you've been working from home, organizing my files, helping with business correspondence. Because you asked me to. Because I thought I was helping my husband during a difficult time." I paused, allowing tears to gather in my eyes. "Are you saying there's truth to Richard's accusations? Have you been doing something illegal?" Diana leaned forward in her chair. "Clara, Marcus is under a lot of stress right now. The accusations are completely false, but they could still damage his reputation and his business. We're trying to understand how Richard got access to confidential information." "I don't understand what any of this has to do with me," I said, my voice growing stronger with apparent indignation. "If Marcus's business partner is making false accusations, then you should be talking to your attorneys, not interrogating me." Marcus ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized from our years of marriage. He only did it when he felt completely overwhelmed and out of options. "You're right, Clara. I'm sorry. I'm just trying to figure out how everything went so wrong so quickly. Maybe it went wrong because it was wrong to begin with," I said quietly. "Marcus, if there are problems with your business practices, hiding from them won't make them go away." "There are no problems," Diana interjected sharply. "Richard is trying to destroy Marcus, because he's jealous of our success and our relationship." I turned to look at Diana directly, studying her face as if seeing her clearly for the first time. "Success? Diana, my husband is facing federal investigation for financial crimes. You're pregnant with his child while he's still married to me. His business partner is accusing him of fraud. How exactly do you define success?" Diana's composure cracked slightly, revealing the desperation underneath her polished exterior. "Clara, I thought we had an understanding. I thought you were supportive of Marcus and me moving forward together. I was supportive of an amicable divorce and a fresh start for all of us. But I never agreed to participate in covering up criminal activity. Marcus stepped between us, his panic now fully visible. There is no criminal activity, Clara. Richard is lying, probably trying to position himself to take over the business, or avoid his own liability for decisions we made together. Then prove it, Marcus. Open your books to the FBI, cooperate fully with their investigation, and clear your name. If you've done nothing wrong, you have nothing to hide. The silence that followed was deafening. Both Marcus and Diana knew that full cooperation with federal investigators would expose not just the fraud and money laundering, but their plans to flee the country with stolen assets. It's not that simple, Marcus said finally. Even innocent business practices can be misinterpreted by investigators who don't understand the development industry. I need to protect myself legally.
By doing what?
Hiding evidence, fleeing to avoid prosecution. Marcus, listen to yourself. You're talking like a guilty man. I'm talking like a man whose life is being destroyed by false accusations. He snapped, his composure finally breaking completely. And I need to know that my own wife isn't working against me. Your own wife, I repeated slowly, standing up despite the discomfort in my shoulder. Marcus, you've been planning to divorce me for months. You've been stealing marital assets to fund your affair. Your girlfriend is pregnant with your child. In what possible sense am I still your wife? Diana stood as well, her face flushed with anger. Clara, we tried to handle this situation with dignity and respect. We offered you a generous settlement and tried to make this transition as painless as possible. Painless for whom? You ambushed me in a hospital bed while I was recovering from surgery. You've been living in my house, rearranging my furniture, spending my money. You've turned my husband into a criminal, and my marriage into a lie. And now you want my cooperation in covering up your crimes. They're not crimes, Marcus said desperately. They're business decisions that are being mischaracterized by someone with a grudge. I walked to Marcus's desk and picked up his phone, holding it out to him. Then call the FBI right now. Tell them you want to cooperate fully with their investigation. Schedule an appointment to provide documentation and testimony that will clear your name. Marcus stared at the phone but made no move to take it. Call them, Marcus. Prove to me that Richard is lying, and that you're the honorable man I married. I can't do that without consulting with my attorneys first. Then call your attorneys and tell them you want to cooperate with federal investigators. Clara, you don't understand the legal complexities involved. I understand that innocent people don't need teams of lawyers to avoid cooperating with law enforcement. I understand that honest businessmen don't hide assets in offshore accounts. And I understand that faithful husbands don't have pregnant mistresses. Diana moved closer to Marcus, taking his arm in a gesture that was both protective and possessive. Clara, I think you need to leave. Marcus doesn't have to justify his business decisions to you, especially when you're clearly not acting in his best interests. You're right, Diana. I'm not acting in Marcus's best interests anymore. I'm acting in the interests of justice, honesty, and accountability. 3 concepts that neither of you seem to understand. I moved toward the door, then paused and turned back to face them. There's something you both should know. I've been documenting Marcus's financial irregularities for weeks. Every fraudulent transaction, every hidden account, every piece of evidence that proves you've been stealing from banks, from investors, and from me. The blood drained from Marcus's face. Clara, what are you saying? I'm saying that I gave all of that documentation to the FBI yesterday morning, along with copies of your emails discussing money laundering, your plans to flee the country, and Diana's involvement in creating fake invoices and falsified business records. Diana sank back into her chair, one hand pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock and terror. You were so convinced that I was helpless, I continued, my voice steady and calm despite the magnitude of what I was revealing. So certain that my accident made me vulnerable and compliant. You never considered that I might be intelligent enough to recognize what you were doing, or strong enough to fight back. Clara, please, Marcus whispered. We can work this out. We can fix this. There's nothing to fix, Marcus. You made your choices, and now you get to live with the consequences. Both of you. The baby, Diana said, her voice barely audible. Clara, I'm pregnant. Whatever you think Marcus has done, this child is innocent. You're right, Diana. that child is innocent. And that's exactly why he or she deserves better than parents who are criminals and fugitives. Maybe being born in prison will actually give that baby a better chance at an honest life than being raised by you two. I opened the office door, then turned back for one final statement. Diana, you came to my hospital room thinking you were negotiating with a victim. But I was never your victim. I was your opponent, and you just lost. 3 days later, federal agents arrested Marcus at a construction site and Diana at her apartment. The charges included bank fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, and interstate transportation of stolen property. The local news covered the arrests extensively, focusing on the fall of a prominent Portland developer and his accomplice. Richard called me that evening to express his gratitude and relief. Clara, I can't thank you enough for your courage in coming forward with that evidence. Without your documentation, they might have been able to destroy records and escape prosecution. Thank you for giving me a legitimate avenue to expose their crimes, Richard. Your testimony as Marcus's business partner gave my evidence credibility that I couldn't have provided alone. What will you do now? I'm starting my own marketing firm, just like Marcus suggested. Turns out he was right about one thing. I do have what it takes to be my own boss. The divorce was finalized without complications once Marcus's assets were frozen pending criminal proceedings. I received far more than Diana's original settlement offer had proposed, since the court had access to the hidden accounts and offshore assets that Marcus had tried to conceal. 6 months later, I was sitting in my new office downtown when Beth brought me a newspaper article about the trial. Marcus had been sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Diana received 8 years, with the judge noting that her pregnancy and cooperation with prosecutors had resulted in a reduced sentence. Any regrets? Beth asked, settling into the client chair across from my desk. About what? Ending my marriage to a criminal, exposing financial fraud that could have destroyed innocent investors, refusing to be victimized by 2 people who thought I was too weak to fight back. No regrets then. None at all. Marcus and Diana made their own choices, and I made mine. The difference is, my choices were honest. I looked out the window of my office at the Portland skyline, thinking about how much my life had changed since that morning when Diana walked into my hospital room with her funeral flowers and her arrogant assumptions about my character. You know what the strangest part is? I said to Beth, they actually did me a favor. If Marcus had been faithful, if he'd been honest about our finances, if he'd simply asked for a divorce without all the manipulation and fraud, I might have spent the rest of my life in a marriage that was slowly suffocating me. Instead, you discovered that you're stronger than you ever imagined. I discovered that I'm exactly as strong as I always was. I just needed the right motivation to use that strength. A year after Diana's hospital visit, I received a letter forwarded through my attorney. It was from Diana, written from the federal correctional facility where she was serving her sentence. She wanted to apologize, to explain her actions, to ask for my forgiveness and understanding. I read the letter once, then dropped it into my office shredder without responding. Some people deserved forgiveness and second chances. Diana Reeves was not one of them. The woman who had walked into my hospital room, thinking she held all the cards, who had offered me a deal she was certain I couldn't refuse, had learned a valuable lesson about underestimating people who appear vulnerable. Sometimes the person lying in the hospital bed is not the victim, but the strategist. Sometimes the person who seems helpless is actually the most dangerous opponent you could face. I built my marketing firm into one of Portland's most successful boutique agencies, specializing in crisis management, reputation recovery. Clients came to me when they needed someone who understood how to fight back against impossible odds, how to turn apparent weakness into strategic advantage, how to emerge stronger from devastating setbacks. They came to me because they'd heard the story of the woman who'd been betrayed by her husband and threatened by his mistress in a hospital room, but who'd turned that betrayal into justice and that threat into triumph. They came because they knew that if I could take down 2 federal criminals while recovering from surgery, I could handle whatever corporate crisis or personal disaster they were facing. My reputation was built on the simple truth that the most powerful weapon against people who would victimize you is refusing to be victimized. Diana had offered me a deal I couldn't refuse, not realizing that what I couldn't refuse was the opportunity to show her and Marcus exactly who they were dealing with. The deal I ultimately accepted wasn't the one Diana had proposed in that hospital room. It was the deal I made with myself to never again allow anyone to mistake my kindness for weakness, my cooperation for compliance, or my injuries for helplessness. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.